Okay, so today I'm going to try a little different format where I'm trying to teach some of my absolutist concepts in a more visually compelling way. So I'm going to use the stupid pointer thing that you see sometimes in YouTube on memes and stuff, right, that we can really hammer at home, just to give us a little visual feedback here. So what is the stimuli acme? Let's start with that. Right, just got to hammer it home. It almost shows like a level of frustration of how many times I've had to explain something or how stupid it is that I have to keep explaining it or at all. Right, so what is the stimuli acme? First of all, it's the idea that there's no higher measure or form of value than hedonism, which means that's what people typically value in terms of, like, that's their meaning of life, that's their life goals, everything like that, right? You might think, like, if you were to ask, like, what is the meaning of life, or what do people refer to, or like risk their life for, or whatever, right? It comes down to, their partner, often, right? Like, they base their whole life around it, their sexual partner, and again, the pleasure that's tied to that, right? So you would observe that there is no higher form or measure of value than hedonism. And the highest form of hedonism, presumably, then is sexual in nature. But again, so that's the premise, is that, again, the highest form of value that people know is hedonism, pleasure, and the highest form of pleasure is the sexual aspect. That's why people base their life around it. That's why that's the whole, so much emphasis is placed on that. So there is no, like, higher, lofty, like, kind of standard that sometimes is referred to or, like, assumed, right? So a lofty standard meaning, like, something above that, like, just, okay, it's just base hedonism, it's the stuff of animals, it's nature's way of inspiring reproduction, right? That's what it is, right? So the human ego allows you to glorify it in such a way that this is kind of how they do it, in a way that, like, they angrily tap, like, to kind of show how stupid something is. It's like, how many times do I have to explain this concept, right, before it's whatever? So let's proof it a little bit. I'll give you some of the proofs, basically meaning, right, like, how would you really demonstrate this? I'm doing it like a mathematical equation. But, one of the key ones is definitely profanity. Now, how do we explain profanity as a proof of the stimuli acme? It's the fact that this should be a middle finger instead, then, since we're talking about profanity. But this would imply that, again, most profanity and vulgar, swear words are sexual in nature. Even if you're not thinking about something sexual when you're saying it, even if you're not, the topic isn't sexual conversation, you're not thinking about that, right? It has nothing to do with that, but you still refer to it because human beings can think of no higher form of value or measure, whether positive or negative, right? Whether they're saying it in a positive way, like, that's effing great, or, oh, that's terrible, that's, they're insulting somebody. It comes down to a sexual hedonistic thing that we're referring to, right? So it is like almost a Freudian overlap. I don't know if Freud talked about this specifically, but this concept is kind of similar to that. I won't say it really took inspiration from that, because it's something I just observed. But again, that profanity aspect, it would make sense, right? That people are obsessed with it, obsessed with sex, obsessed with pleasure, obsessed with hedonism. And the reason why it makes sense is because, again, something good happens, you might say some profanity in celebration. Something bad happens, you might say some profanity, right, in anger and disgust, right? So no matter what happens, the highest form of value that you know is again, hedonistic, sexual in nature, right? You can't think of any higher other form of expression than that. So it's similar to how people say God, even if they're not religious. Like, they'll say, oh my God, or they'll say something related to God, even if they're not actually thinking about that. There's a similar thing. Like, you're not thinking about sex necessarily, but it's the highest form of value that you know, so you just accept the fact that that's something that you're always obsessed with, and fighting the cognitive dissonance of how it's controlled and restrained and kind of, kept in a half-mast state. So profanity is a big one. Again, think about most swear words, they have to do with that, right? So it shows you the highest form of expression right there. Music, most of it, lyrics and so forth, are romantic. You can say this about fiction too. The fact that, most music has to do with it. Romance, love song kind of thing, lyrics and stuff have to do with romance or dating or sex or whatever. A lot of fiction has to do with it, right? There's a lot of social engineering and conditioning that goes into it that way. And then I put fiction as well. And so what that means is basically that fiction would basically tell you that it is, again, lot of romance in stories, lot of goals are based around that, like, the hero's trying to save the princess and, whatever it might be. So it's posed as like a MacGuffin device or some, again, social engineering. You end up with the one person at the end, right? It's definitely shown in such a way that is like the end-all, be-all, right? Which in turn refers to the hedonistic sexual aspect behind that. We kind of try to dress it up, glorify it, literally dress it up even, but just, right, it comes down to nothing more than the base hedonistic instinct that you see in animals, nature's way of inspiring reproduction. Again, doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it, but it shows you that's what this concept is that you are basically obsessing over it, fixating on it. It's the end-all, be-all, right? That's kind of social engineering. Humor is nothing more than cognitive dissonance, and so it's kind of fitting that this hedonistic tendency would be there. In other words, there's a lot of humor to do with relationships, and that doesn't discredit them or disqualify them. Oh, no, it's just like you'll reinforce it. You'll say, why is it funny? Because it's uncomfortable, because it's true, because you'll point out the contradictions of how, this person you met in your local geographical environment is supposedly an absolute, right? Like, it's love, it's meant to be this and that, even if it's not, right? So you'll point out the contradiction, the conflict, and the struggle, and all the inconsistencies, but you still pretend like it's absolute, right? So that you specify that you specify the stimuli Acme to one person instead of being free or uninhibited, open relationships, whatever. So in order to specify it to one person, you have to lie to yourself and kind of create this illusion, right, of the false absolute to value or to specify, as I call it. So again, the humor is almost a defense mechanism. It's like, you can make a joke like, you just want to sleep around with 100 people, ha ha ha, or something sexual. But that actually is the tendency that people would have. And so in kind of training and taming you like an animal to pretend like you don't want that, all you can do is laugh, and as a defense mechanism, because in reality, right, your inherent tendency is being subverted by that specification of the stimuli Acme. So that means that basically the thing is that humor is like a defense mechanism. It's like, how can you how else can I explain it? Again, it's some sort of contradiction, right, that you're forced to reinforce anyway. Like, this thing is absolute, right? This one person is the only one for you, and you're not attracted to anybody else. You don't want to ever be with anybody else, right? You're genuinely happy, content with that. It's supposedly an absolute. But it's not, but you do it anyway, right? That's kind of what it means. It's not absolute, but you pretend like it is just so you can specify it and be controlled and have the construct of marriage. And like you have this constant conflict with it. The conflict to maintain the illusion that it's absolute. But it's clearly not, or the fact that you have to do that would indicate this. So right, so for example, again, like, you got to just think most humor has to do with it, right? Even, profane words, like I was saying, are considered funny or whatever in certain contexts. So that's what it means, is like, I'm just trying to think of a specific example, but like a lot of dating humor, and we'll kind of joke about it. Stand-up comedian, you're in the audience with your girlfriend or your wife, and they're joking about all the troubles of married life or relationships, and it's like, oh, yes, of course, you can laugh at that, but then you realize, oh, it's true. Or, again, not even in a disqualifying way specifically, it's more like a broader topic. It's like, it's not absolute. That's all it means, such that you can specify it. Meaning, like, absolute would imply, again, you're with this one person as opposed to anybody, everybody else, or you restrict it, you limit it. And that would be based on the premise that it's absolute. But then you look at the origin point. Oh, where did you meet? Out of 8 billion people in the world, how come this person's absolute? It's a soulmate. Oh, it happened to be in your local geographic environment that you didn't necessarily even choose. Right? So it's pointing out the contradictions and the inconsistencies of it. Right, but yet you still do it. You kind of reinforce it as though it's absolute. That's really what humor is a form of cognitive dissonance, that, like, something that you're basically forced to accept and made to accept, but that deep down is not absolute, but all you can do when it's pointed out that it's not absolute is laugh it off, right, as sort of a defense mechanism. So that's what a lot of humor relates to, is the contradictions of that supposed absolute. And then the last one here is life goals. And the reason why we're going to look at that, I got these from the dollar store, so I just kind of wanted to show it off and mess around with it. But the life goals thing has to relate to the fact of, again, like, the goal, like, what is the meaning of life, purpose of life, whatever, get married, white picket fence, have kids, right, social structure, right? So you could argue some value for the family system in that. But what you can't do is you can't say that's absolute or universal, or that's what everybody should do or everybody wants to do. Right? You might be perfectly content not being with anybody, or you might be perfectly content sleeping around and having an open relationship, or, there is no one size fits all, but it's treated like it is. That's the end all be all. That's what you risk your life for. That's what you work for. The inherent desire suggested nature's way of inspiring reproduction, that kind of stimuli acme basis, hedonistic element. That's what you would base your life around. So it's like this treated as some lofty thing, but it's nothing more than that inherent hedonistic thing, hedonistic tendency that is like, it's, right, the inherent hedonistic tendency that would allow you to basically, I don't know, I feel like I would have had more to say about this, but I'll keep it brief. I just did this as like a joke. But the inherent hedonistic tendency, which means that, right, it's the stuff of animals, but we celebrate it in our ego, we make it a big thing, and we, again, base our whole life around it. It's one thing even, okay, you have sex, casual, whatever, but you base your whole life around it. You split your finances down the middle, right down the middle. You split your finance down the middle, you sacrifice so much, you live with the person. It's one thing, okay, you have the sex and enjoy it, whatever. But and again, you can say it's good for the family system, but that's still a form of control that you could acknowledge and then decide to do or not, instead of glorifying in some lofty way. You live with the person based on the stimuli acme, based on hedonistic tendency, right? That's the whole base of it. You have basically split your finances down the middle. You basically do all this, right, just based on the stimuli acme, just because you're down bad, if you want to use modern terminology, just because you're, so obsessed with sex and the pleasure and the hedonistic tendency inherently. So again, none of this is condemning it per se, right? It's more an observational basis, but this is the one that controls you in this era and has tremendous power over you. Let me see if I can, delete that or something. I need a better way of doing this, but... Yeah, that was kind of a fun way to just show that off. I wanted to see what that'd be like. Right, I'm trying to think, I had a couple other ways to prove it, but I think profanity is the best one that always comes to mind, is people would swear, curse, something negative, positive, and it would allow you to, show you that people can't think of any higher form of value than that to base it on. Like, right, what you're talking about doesn't have to have anything to do with that, but it would still be something that is talked about. Like, but no, there's like a joking frustration in that. Like, you're using the pointer to try to get a point across because people are so dumb, or I've had to explain this like so many times.